Welcome to another detailed Shatterline weapon guide, where today we'll be going over the most accurate SMG, the Tier 1 Z-940 Drachen. We'll be looking at its in-depth details as well as some of its most noteworthy attachments, and also be talking about my personal best builds for both PvP and PvE. So let's get on with it. As always, let's look at this weapon's rate of fire. For the Drachen SMG, we have got a rate of fire of 899 RPM, which is the third highest in the entire game. Interestingly enough, the other two higher RPMs are also both SMGs. So that puts the Drachen's RPM as the middle of the pack in terms of RPM ranking for the SMGs. Next up, we've got good old damage. For the SMGs, the damage is broken up into 3 different ranges, because that's how Shatterline works. I've gone ahead and found out exactly what those ranges are for you guys, so let's start off with the close quarters combat range. For the Drachen, the CQB range goes from 0 to 12 meters, taking a total of 4 shots to the body to kill our enemy, meaning that at this range, we've got a body shot TTK of 200 milliseconds. However, for headshots, the CQB range varies a little bit. The range goes from 0 to 10 meters instead of 12, only taking 3 shots to the head to kill, giving it a TTK of 133 milliseconds. Take note, the bloodstream modification does not alter this TTK if the enemy is at full health. And this is what 12 and 10 meters looks like. Next up, we've got mid-distance range, which for the Drachen, this range for body shots goes from 13 to 22 meters. And at this range, we take a big jump of 3 more shots required to kill, meaning we now take 7 shots to the body to kill at this range. Take note of one thing, at 12 meters, we go from 4 shots to 7 shots at 13 meters. It's not a steady decrease in damage as you get further from your enemy. Instead, damages have a strict cutoff distance where the damage does a hard drop off. This 7 shots to the body gives us a TTK of 400 milliseconds, which sounds a lot less scary than 7 shots. For headshots, the mid-distance range goes from 11 to 17 meters, taking 4 shots to the head to kill, meaning it gives us a headshot TTK of 200 milliseconds. I must mention that the bloodstream modification extends the 4 shots to the head range up till 22 meters as well. However, no direct impact to TTK for anything below 17 meters. And once again, for reference, this is what 22 and 17 meters looks like. And anything beyond this falls under the long distance range, which we'll go over now. So SMGs are notoriously bad at long ranges, and for Shatterline, this is no different. For the Drachen, this range for body shots is at 23 meters or further, which brings our bullets to kill 5 more shots to kill. That's a whole 12 shots to kill an enemy at 23 meters or further, giving us a TTK of 734 milliseconds. However, if we headshot, it only takes 5 shots to the head to kill, more than doubling the damage at this distance. So if you're gonna fight at this distance, try to aim for the head. And for the headshot, that would be a TTK of 267 milliseconds. And moving on, here's the hipfire spread comparison of all the SMGs. And as you can see in this image, the Drachen has got the best hipfire spread out of all the SMGs, which is great for those players who like to hipfire. Next, we've got Recoil, which as you can see, the recoil kicks up, and about 75% of the way through, it does a little kick to the right, but comes right back down to the center. Thankfully, the recoil is somewhat fairly easy to control compared to some of the other SMGs. And now, for handling of this weapon, starting off with aim down sight time, we're looking at 167 milliseconds, which is quite decent on its own. For reload time, we've got 2.2 seconds, which is the second slowest out of the SMGs, taking as long or almost as long as some of the ARs in the game. For sprint to fire time, we're back to 150 milliseconds, which is standard across basically every weapon in the game. And while we're on that note of being the same, we're still at 6.6 meters per second for base move speed. However, our ADS move speed is up to 3.4 meters per second, which is a good increase from shotguns being almost as fast as sidearms. And to close off base stats, we've got magazine capacity. which for the tier 1 SMG that is of 24 shots, which is the least out of all the SMGs. And now let's get down to attachments and mods, starting off with the latter. For modifications, we've once again got 2 mods for this weapon, and we'll start with the legendary one first, the Drachen Racer, which resets dash and sprint upon a kill. With that being said, I have to say, this is probably one of the worst mods in the entire game, if not the worst. The use for it is so limited. It only applies to 4 out of the 8 operators in the game, and out of those 4, I'd say only Orbit and Mongoose could realistically have some benefit out of this mod. The best use for this mod in my opinion would be in PvE, where you're constantly killing glass heads, and could allow you to keep dashing all the time with either one of those operators. But even for that, I'd still prefer the other mod, which we'll talk about now, the Drachen Bloodstream. The Drachen Bloodstream increases precision damage by 10%. As we mentioned earlier, there is little impact in it for PvP. It extends the 4 kill range by 5 meters for full health enemies, but I think it truly shines in PvE. That 10% damage increase when you're dealing with adamants and other elite monsters can be quite useful for dishing out damage. Now on to attachments. I must say, this weapon's attachments are quite bad in my opinion. Nothing really stands out and they have way too much focus on sliding, jumping accuracy, as well as hip firing. And I'm not a fan of spending attachments to buff either one of those 3. But let's look at some of the more noteworthy ones. First up, there's the LP ammo, which improves weapon stability by 35% when hip firing, which is ideal for anyone who likes to hip fire. However, I'll say, I tested this on a wall and I didn't notice too much of a difference, so I'm not sure about this one. If I were you, I would try this in shooting range before I actually started using this. There's the Gunstream 0300, which in my opinion is ideal for PvP, and it brings your ADS time down from 167 milliseconds to about 150 milliseconds or so. It just helps you be a little bit faster in combat. Another noteworthy sight is the Gunstream Z-54, which is best for PvE as your fights tend to be a bit further range, and this helps deal with that range, as well as assist you control your recoil a little bit. I do, however, find it zooms a little bit too much for PvP, which is why I opt for the 0300. So there isn't much here to look at. This weapon does a shit job at having good attachments. However, with that being said, let's look at my personal best PvE and PvP loadouts. Starting off with PvE, I like to use the Z-54 sight. Like I said, it helps with the range as well as controlling your recoil a little bit, which you will need in PvE. I also put in the Hush Edge Cutter, which I pretty much use it for its sliding recoil buff, but mostly I use it due to lack of better choices, to be honest. And lastly, I use the Extended Magazine, which I enjoy in PvE, as I find 24 bullets to not be enough to deal with those bigger enemies, and the ADS debuff isn't really noticeable in PvE. Jumping over to PvP, I swap out 2 attachments. I keep the Hush Edge Cutter, once again for lack of better choice. All the other ones are equally as bad, but I do opt in for the Gunstream 0300, which as you guys may know by now, I favor speed in PvP over most things. Also, the 1.2 times zoom is a much better choice than the other options for close quarters combat. And lastly, I swap out the Extended Magazine for the faster reload magazine. I feel I don't need the extra bullets and rather have a faster reload time with the base 24 shots. This magazine brings down your reload down to 1.8 seconds, which is a 400 millisecond upgrade, and that goes a long way when you're in the middle of a gunfight. And don't forget, if you want to learn more about Shatterline, show some love by hitting that subscribe button or by leaving a comment down below, or both. Thank you guys very much for watching, much love, see you next time.